Echoes in the canyon. The dusty attic was sweltering under the midday sun, its wooden beams creaking softly as if burdened by the weight of untold stories. Clara Michaels brushed a strand of auburn hair from her face, her brow damp with sweat, as she rifled through boxes piled high with forgotten memories. It had been 3 days since her grandmother Evelyn had passed away, leaving behind the sprawling family home nestled in the Colorado Rockies. Clara had always loved visiting as a child, but now, standing amidst the clutter, she felt a profound sense of loss. It was then she found it, a small, leather-bound book tucked beneath an old quilt. Its cover was worn, the edges frayed, but the initials EM were unmistakably etched into the corner. Clara opened it carefully, the scent of aged paper wafting up to greet her. April 12th, 1956. I saw him again today in the canyon. His eyes were like fire, and his words carried secrets I wasn't meant to hear. I fear what will happen if I return, but something draws me back. Clara's brow furrowed as she read. Her grandmother had never spoken of a mysterious figure or of anything strange in the canyon behind their home. Evelyn's stories had always been about picnics by the creek and wildflower picking in springtime. What was this? As she flipped through the pages, the entries became even more cryptic. They described hidden paths, whispers in the wind, and a strange rock formation that Evelyn seemed drawn to, as if it were calling her. Clara's fingers tightened on the book. There was an urgency to the words, a desperation that seeped through time. By the time Clara reached the final page, she was trembling. If you find this journal, you must follow where it leads. The truth is buried in the canyon, and it is waiting to be unearthed. Be brave, my dear. Her heart pounded as she closed the journal and stared out the attic window at the vast expanse of pine-covered hills stretching into the distance. The canyon Evelyn had written about was less than a mile away. Clara had explored it as a child, but she'd never seen anything unusual. Still, the pull of curiosity was undeniable. Armed with the journal and a flashlight, Clara decided to head out before the day faded. She slipped into her hiking boots, her mind racing with questions. Who was the man her grandmother had seen? What truth was she referring to? The trail leading to the canyon was overgrown, branches clawing at her sleeves as she pushed through. The towering pines seemed to whisper in the breeze, their voices low and haunting. The deeper she went, the quieter the world became, as though even the birds were holding their breath. Finally, she reached the edge of the canyon. Its steep walls were a mosaic of rust red and ochre, carved by centuries of wind and water. Clara pulled out the journal, flipping to a page where her grandmother had drawn a crude map. There was the creek, winding like a silver ribbon through the valley below, and near it, a rock formation Evelyn had labeled the Sentinel. Clara descended carefully, her boots slipping on loose gravel. The air grew cooler the further she went, the scent of damp earth filling her nostrils. When she reached the creek, she paused, listening to the gentle burble of water over stones. The Sentinel was not far. Evelyn's map had been remarkably accurate, and soon Clara found herself standing before the peculiar formation. It was massive, resembling a crooked finger pointing toward the sky. The surface was covered in strange grooves and patterns, almost like runes. Clara reached out to touch it, her fingers tracing the cool, weathered stone. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the canyon, carrying with it a sound that froze Clara in place. It wasn't the natural howl of the breeze or the rustle of leaves. It was a voice, faint and melodic, whispering her name. Clara. She whipped around, her pulse hammering. The canyon was empty, the only movement the swaying of grasses along the creek. Hello? She called, her voice echoing back to her. There was no reply, but the voice had felt real, too real to ignore. Her gaze returned to the Sentinel. At its base, something caught her eye. There, nestled among the roots of a tree, was a small opening in the rock, just large enough for a person to squeeze through. Clara hesitated. Every rational part of her screamed to turn back, to leave this place and never return. But the journal's final words burned in her mind. The truth is buried in the canyon, and it is waiting to be unearthed. With a deep breath, she knelt down and shone her flashlight into the opening. The beam revealed a narrow tunnel, its walls shimmering faintly as though embedded with quartz. The air was cool and damp, carrying a faint metallic tang. Clara steeled herself and crawled inside, the rock pressing close around her. As she moved deeper, the whispers returned, growing louder and more distinct. They weren't menacing, but they weren't welcoming either. It felt as though the canyon itself was alive, watching her every move. When the tunnel finally widened into a small chamber, Clara gasped. The walls were covered in markings similar to those on the Sentinel, but here they were pristine, untouched by time. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and atop it lay an object wrapped in faded cloth. Clara approached cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. She reached out, her hands trembling, and unwrapped the cloth to reveal a small, ornate box made of dark wood. Its surface was etched with intricate designs, and a golden latch held it shut. Her fingers lingered on the latch, the whispers around her now a deafening chorus. She hesitated, knowing that whatever lay inside could change everything she thought she knew about her grandmother and herself. And yet, she couldn't stop. Taking a deep breath, Clara opened the box. The air in the chamber seemed to shift the moment Clara opened the box. A faint golden light spilled out, illuminating her face and casting strange shadows on the rune-covered walls. Inside the box lay a small cylindrical object made of smooth, polished metal. It was surprisingly warm to the touch when Clara picked it up, its surface engraved with swirling patterns that seemed to shift under her fingers. "What are you?" she whispered, turning it over in her hands. The whispers in the chamber faded, replaced by an eerie silence that made her skin prickle. She expected the object to weigh heavily in her palm, but it felt light, almost impossibly so, as if it were filled with air rather than metal. At one end, there was a faint indentation, almost like a button. Clara's first instinct was to press it, but something held her back. Evelyn's journal had warned of dangers, and she wasn't about to dive headfirst into the unknown without some idea of what she was dealing with. Instead, she wrapped the object back in the cloth and placed it carefully in her backpack. Turning her flashlight to the walls, Clara examined the runes more closely. They seemed ancient, their grooves sharp and precise, as if freshly carved. The designs reminded her of some of the Native American petroglyphs she'd seen during her hikes, but these were more complex, almost mathematical in their symmetry. A soft rumble echoed through the chamber, and Clara froze. The air around her grew heavier, pressing against her chest. She turned toward the tunnel entrance, suddenly desperate to get out. Her ascent back through the narrow passage felt slower than before, her movements clumsy as adrenaline surged through her veins. By the time she emerged into the canyon, the sun was dipping low on the horizon, painting the rocky walls in hues of amber and crimson. The air felt cool against her flushed skin, and she took a moment to catch her breath. As Clara stood there, her eyes fell once more on the Sentinel. The rock seemed to glow faintly in the fading light, as though it were alive. She felt a strange tug toward it, but the rational part of her mind screamed for her to leave, to return to the safety of the house. She turned away, making her way back up the canyon trail. The whispers didn't follow her, but the sensation of being watched lingered. By the time she reached the house, the sky was awash with stars, and the moon cast long, pale shadows across the yard. Once inside, Clara set the backpack down on the kitchen table and retrieved the journal. She flipped through its pages again, searching for any mention of the strange metal object. Finally, she found it. May 7th, 1956. I found it. The key. It hums with life, as though it has a will of its own. He warned me not to touch it, but I couldn't resist. I feel it pulling me toward something, though I don't know what. I'm afraid, but I can't stop now. Clara's pulse quickened. A key? To what? And who was he? The journal didn't provide any answers, only more questions. Evelyn's entries became more erratic after that, filled with fragmented sentences and cryptic warnings. The Sentinel knows. The path will open when the time is right. Beware the one who watches. Clara closed the journal, her hands trembling. Her grandmother had clearly been caught up in something far bigger than herself, something that had haunted her until the end. And now, that burden had been passed to Clara. She unwrapped the metal object again, holding it up to the light. The swirling patterns seemed to glow faintly, and for a moment she thought she felt a vibration, soft and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Okay, she muttered to herself, setting it down. one step at a time. The rest of the night passed in restless anticipation. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that the house itself was alive, its creaks and groans more pronounced than usual. She finally drifted off in the early hours of the morning, the journal and the mysterious object tucked safely under her pillow. The next day, Clara woke to the sound of a car pulling up the gravel driveway. She peered out the window to see a sleek, black SUV parked in front of the house. Two men in suits stepped out, their movements deliberate and synchronized. Alarm bells went off in her mind. She didn't recognize them, and something about their presence felt off. Too polished, too purposeful. Clara grabbed the journal and the metal object, stuffing them into her backpack before heading downstairs. By the time she reached the front door, the men were already knocking. "Miss Michaels?" one of them asked when she opened the door. He was tall and lean, his sharp features framed by dark sunglasses. "Yes?" Clara replied cautiously. "I'm Agent Cross. This is my partner, Agent Wells. We're with a specialized branch of the National Park Service," he said, flashing a badge. "We're investigating unusual activity in the area, and we're hoping to ask you a few questions." Clara's grip tightened on the doorframe. "Unusual activity? Did they know about the canyon? About the object?" "I'm not sure how I can help," she said, forcing a polite smile. "We understand your grandmother, Evelyn Michaels, spent a lot of time exploring the nearby canyon," Wells interjected. "Did she ever mention finding anything unusual?" Clara's stomach twisted. She shook her head, trying to keep her expression neutral. "No, not that I can recall." "Why?" Cross tilted his head, studying her closely. "If you come across anything out of the ordinary, we'd appreciate it if you let us know. These canyons are protected lands, and unauthorized discoveries can pose risks." Clara nodded, her heart pounding. "Of course. I'll keep that in mind." The agents lingered a moment longer before nodding and returning to their car. Clara watched as they drove off, her mind racing. She had a sinking feeling that whatever she had stumbled into, it wasn't just her grandmother's secret anymore. The black SUV's taillights disappeared down the long, winding road, but Clara stood frozen in the doorway. Her heart raced as questions flooded her mind. Who were those men really? What did they know about her grandmother's discovery? She clutched the journal tightly, its pages now more precious than ever. If Evelyn had been hunted for what she found, Clara was now part of the same mystery. Locking the door, she retreated to the kitchen and spread the journal, the metal object, and her map of the canyon across the table. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. The truth is buried in the canyon, and it is waiting to be unearthed. Clara knew she couldn't stay in the house. The agents would likely return, and next time, they might not leave so politely. She had to act quickly. Stuffing a few essentials into her backpack, she prepared to head back to the canyon. As she zipped the pack, her fingers brushed against the metal object, which seemed to hum faintly at her touch. It wasn't just an artifact. It was alive in some way. The sun was beginning its descent when Clara reached the canyon trail again. The Sentinel loomed in the distance, its jagged silhouette cutting sharply against the fiery orange sky. This time, Clara's steps were more deliberate. The fear she had felt yesterday was now tempered with determination. When she reached the Sentinel, the wind picked up, swirling around her like an unseen force. She took out the metal object, her breath catching as it began to glow faintly in her hand. The swirling patterns on its surface pulsed with a rhythmic light, as if guiding her. She held it up to the Sentinel, watching as the grooves in the rock seemed to respond, glowing faintly in return. The object grew warmer in her hand, and without thinking, she pressed the indentation that resembled a button. The air seemed to vibrate around her, and the ground beneath her feet shuddered. A deep, resonant hum echoed through the canyon as a section of the Sentinel began to shift. Clara stumbled back, watching in awe as a hidden doorway revealed itself, carved seamlessly into the rock. She hesitated only a moment before stepping inside. The passage was narrow and dimly lit by the glow of the metal object in her hand. The air was cool and carried the faint metallic tang she had noticed before. The whispers returned, growing louder as she descended deeper into the rock. At the end of the tunnel, she entered a vast chamber. The walls shimmered as though embedded with starlight, and in the center of the room stood a massive, crystalline structure. It pulsed with the same light as the object in her hand, the two seemingly resonating with one another. Clara approached slowly, the whispers now a cacophony of voices. They weren't threatening, they were pleading. She realized they weren't speaking words but emotions. Urgency, sorrow, and hope. She placed the metal object on a pedestal at the base of the crystalline structure. As soon as it made contact, the room erupted in light. Clara shielded her eyes, but the sensation of warmth and energy washed over her. When the light dimmed, the whispers became coherent, forming a single harmonious voice. "Thank you," it said. "You have freed us." Clara looked around, trying to find the source of the voice. It seemed to emanate from the very walls, the air itself alive with sound. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We are the Echoes," the voice replied. "Fragments of a civilization that existed long before yours. When our world faced destruction, we preserved our knowledge and essence within this canyon, waiting for one who could hear us." Clara's mind reeled. "My grandmother? She found you?" "Yes," the Echoes said, "but she feared what others would do if they discovered us. She chose to protect our secret, knowing the world was not ready. Now, it is your choice." Clara's heart sank as she realized the weight of what was being asked of her. She had uncovered something extraordinary, but the agent's visit had made it clear that the wrong people could exploit this discovery. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. "There is a way to seal this chamber forever," the Echoes said, "to ensure our knowledge cannot be used for harm. But it is a choice that comes with sacrifice. The key must remain, and so must you." Clara's breath hitched. "You're saying I'd have to stay here? Forever?" "Yes," the Echoes replied, "to guide and protect, to ensure the world remains safe from those who would misuse what we have preserved." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. The thought of leaving her life behind was unbearable, but the Echo's presence filled her with a sense of purpose she had never known. Her grandmother had spent her life guarding this secret. Could Clara do the same? She thought of Evelyn's journal, of the cryptic warnings and the courage it must have taken to leave the clues that led her here. Clara squared her shoulders, her voice steady. "I'll do it. I'll stay." The chamber glowed warmly, as if in gratitude. The crystalline structure began to shift, its light enveloping Clara in a cocoon of energy. She felt no fear, only a deep connection to the Echoes and the knowledge they carried. As the chamber sealed itself, Clara's last thought was of her grandmother. She whispered softly, "I'll protect them, just like you did." And then, silence. The canyon returned to its quiet state, the Sentinel standing tall against the evening sky. For those who might pass by in the years to come, it would remain just another rock formation. But deep within, Clara had become one with the Echoes, a guardian of ancient wisdom, ensuring their secrets stayed buried until the world was ready.